alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to A Live After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a new guest to the podcast, Eddie Louise. Welcome to the show. Oh, now I can't hear you. Oh, there you go.
No, I live in downtown LA, Tim, and a siren just went by, so I had hit mute for a second.
Well done. Well done.
So, hi, it's very great to be on your show.
It's great to have you, especially with that swift mute skill that you have. I have a feeling this will have some good sound quality this time.
Living in downtown LA, you get used to that mute button right away, you know, the sirens and the helicopters. So.
Oh, yeah. I actually had some family out on the West Coast for a while, and one of them lived in LA, and it was always weird because, I mean, I've only been to LA a couple of times, and the traffic there was the thing I noticed the most.
Yeah, it was very, very strange during pandemic when suddenly there were no traffic jams anywhere. And it was so great, and everyone kept saying how much they loved it. And I thought that might mean that people would stop driving so much after nope. As soon as the pandemic eased even the tiniest bit, the roads are every bit as stupid as they always were. So cars in the just a thing.
Yeah. Anyway, Eddie, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your books.
Okay. I am a novelist and an audio drama podcast creator who traveled many of the same frustrating roads that a lot of writers do. I queried multiple manuscripts. I did get an agent, and the agent attempted to sell that first manuscript that we agreed on, and the feedback from publishers was, she has a really dynamic voice. We love her writing. The subject matter is weird, and it's not a good first book. Can she write something a little more mainstream for her first book, and then we'll do this one as her second book once she's developed an audience? So, not to be daunted, I wrote something else, and I tried very, very hard to stick to genre conventions and make it more mainstream, and I thought I'd succeeded. My agent thought I'd succeeded, and we received exactly the same sort of rejections. This is just a little too weird. We wouldn't know where to shelve it for a first book. We really need something. And so I was in despair. I really thought, that's it. I'm never going to be a writer. I can't meet the brief. I can't follow the assignment. And my husband said, don't give up writing because you love it so much. Why don't you try something totally different? And at the time, I had just discovered podcasts, and Welcome to Night Vale was at that first gigantic curve of its fame. And I went, I could write something like that. So coincidentally, at the same time, I am a very vivid dreamer, and I dream my stories. Often the seed for my stories comes from my own dreams. And I was having a dream that was repeating night after night, where I was a late 19th century scientist, a la Marie Curie, or any of those great scientists of that era. And the women that worked as scientists had to wear skirts and, their corsets and the fulsome hair that was expected of the time, even in a laboratory, which is insane. And so I was dressed like Marie Curie, and I was using the wands that were the early part of electrification studies that led to EKGs and everything else that we do now. And I was literally electrocuting myself. And I would wake up having electrocuted myself to death, gasping for air, clutching my poor husband. And he said, will you just write what that dream is about? Because you've got to stop waking me up at night. So that became the seed for Sage and Savant, which is my podcast. And the goal with that was to write a female mad scientist who isn't an evil person. Just like Dr. Frankenstein wasn't truly evil, he was just overly obsessed. Dr. Jekyll was not evil. He was just willing to do some unscrupulous self experimentation. So I wanted to write a woman that it was the same sort of thing. And that became Petra Sage in Sage and Savant. And then midway through the second year, I got a ring. And it was Edge Science Fiction and Fantasy Publishing. And they were fans of the podcast. And they said, have you thought about doing tie-in novels? And I, of course, said, well, yes, obviously. I'm writing books. And that became a 4-book deal. So book 1 is out, book 2 is in the pipeline, book 3 is a little further back in the pipeline, and book 4 behind that. And the funny thing is that these are every bit as genre bending of books as anything I've ever written before, because I'm obsessed with history. So I do a lot of historical research, and anytime Dr. Sager and Professor Savant go to a historical place, it's a real thing. They're in a real circumstance that happened. Oftentimes in famous circumstances, they're just not necessarily famous people. One of my favorites is when they go to Emperor Constantine's court, and they're zookeepers. They're just, because that was one of the first public zoos. And so it's fun. It doesn't actually deal with the politics of Constantine or anything that's happening there, but it's at that era. And the stuff that happened in the zoo is stuff that I found and researched in real history. It's time travel, but it's a bizarre kind of time travel, because the way they time travel is they literally electrocute themselves to death to unmoor their consciousness from their bodies. And it's their consciousness that travels through time and space. And then it has to inhabit a habitable body. And the human body remains habitable for about 13 minutes after death. So literally they're coming into newly dead people and then having to deal with that. So it's time travel, but it's really kind of messy time travel.
Yeah.
And then it ended up having a very strong science fiction bent, because being a novice audio drama creator, I had a narrator. Because I remembered from the time I was a kid, my father was a big radio drama aficionado, and he had a radio station programmed that played all of the old, like The Shadow and the Fu Manchu mysteries and the Mickey Spillane Presents and all of those. And so I listened to all those as a child, radio shows from the 20s and the 30s, and they all had, omniscient narrators. When last we saw our heroes, that sort of thing. And I wrote a narrator like that. But when it came time for the books, I had to explain, because a lot of the information in the podcast comes from that narrator. I had to explain his role. So I ended up writing 4,000 years into the future. This is how archaeologists do archaeology. They're able to make a conscious connection to an item and see the history of that item in situ. And so basically they're doing time traveling too. It's just they no longer have to go to the dead body. And so then I have this far future, 4,000 years in the future archaeologist who is the center of the story too. So the book is all those things, and it's weird and it's mashed up. But the thing is, the one thing that is true of all my writing is I'm obsessed with people. I'm obsessed with characters and what moves them and what drives them. And so no matter what weirdness I'm doing with genre, the center of the story is always going to be a person's story, whatever is happening to them. So that was a long answer to your question.
That all sounds fantastic, though. It's so good. And that was a great question. That's going to give us a fair amount to talk about, I'll say. Because I've never even recorded an audiobook on my own. Did you record any of the voices for the audio drama yourself, or did you mostly get other people to do the actual recording?
So the narrator was a friend of mine from my writing group who just had a beautiful, mellifluous voice, and I tagged him to do the narrator. And then, because we were doing everything on the cheap, my husband played Professor Savant, and I played Dr. Sage.
Of course.
And we did eventually add one other permanent cast member who was also a member of my writing group. Everything else, we would just we pulled people in as we learned the process of how to make audio drama. we learned that there was this whole huge community of wonderful creators that are really good at mentoring and helping and doing this. So we kind of learned as we went along, and I wouldn't do it that same shoestring way the first time. But the one thing it did do when it came to the books then, I could have my narrator, Justin, narrate the audiobooks and keep that consanguinity between the two properties. And like I said, it doesn't hurt that he has an absolutely fantastic voice. And we decided not to go full cast on audiobooks because we have the show, which is full cast. And so we decided just to keep to a single narrator with characterization skills, and that's how we are doing the audiobooks. So it kind of all is weird and strange. And then I've recently been toying with the idea of writing it up as a board game.
Oh, a board game? That was a twist.
So yeah, because imagine it as a tabletop board game where it's cooperative, and the people who are transmigrating, their goal is to get to some place to learn something about the history and to get home alive. And that it's cooperative, and the game is trying to kill you in ways that it always tries to kill. So for example, in one episode, we went into a husband and wife couple that had died of dysentery. And I'm sorry, of cholera. And cholera is probably the most disgusting disease on earth. The human body is capable of expelling 5 gallons of viscera through vomiting and diarrhea, and it will expel 5 gallons before it dies.
Yikes.
And so the result is basically the bodies from cholera are very, very desiccated, severely dehydrated and malnourished, just in a short time, like in 3 to 5 days. And so then we had to do everything exactly right in very short order to get hydration into the bodies and to get nutrients into the bodies while you're feeling like you can't even move because of sickness and stuff. And so there's a challenge to that. And every month, every script that I wrote, I had to think about what is the circumstance and how did the person die so that they can do medical triage and have any hope of living. And so to do it as a board game, as a cooperative board game, where it's a random what body you get.
Oh my.
Do you have the knowledge and the resources to help that body come back to life or not? And then once you're there, do you succeed in your historical objective? And then lastly, the way that in transmigrations that they get home is they have to die in their new body. And when they die in their new body, it sends them back to the lab. And so you have to contrive a way to die that is an effective one, which it's surprisingly hard to kill a human body in historic times. Like you could jump in front of a carriage, for example. And it might maim you, but it's not guaranteed to kill you.
At least not all at once. Right.
It's only in our modern era where there's things like you could jump in front of a subway train and be pretty sure that that's the end for you, right? But in historic eras, death is a little less certain if you don't have a very high cliff to jump off of, if you don't have a firearm or that sort of thing. So finding how to kill yourself to get home. So I was thinking it might make a cooperative board game. I don't know.
That's pretty grisly, but I like it. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I was also thinking, like, if you just found a way to start a fire, that might be enough. But even then, like, I know, I mean, and it's really sad, but I've, like the Tibetan monks that self-immolate and stuff, a lot of them live a lot longer than you'd expect from that.
Exactly.
Which is, it doesn't really bear thinking about.
No, but it really is. The human body is an amazingly resilient thing. And it clings to life. It wants to live. And so that makes, and that was a great challenge for me writing the show and now the books. Because what I'm doing with the show and the books, I want the show to be a complete thing that you can watch, you can feel the story from beginning to end. And I think I succeeded in doing that. I left a lot of questions in the show just by the nature of things. But I want the books to be a complete story end to end that you could enjoy no matter what. But if you both listen and read, there's more.
So these are the same characters, but they're not. But it's not the same story necessarily. They're kind of like, it's just like a side. That sounds very difficult. Let me be frank.
It is. It's the same time period, but basically it's the side quests.
Okay.
It's the things that like I did time jumps in the show. So, for example, from the moment the very first time they transmigrate, it's an accident. It's an actual laboratory accident that electrocutes them and sends them to a battlefield. And when they come back, that's the beginning of Petra Sage's obsession. She can't figure out what happened to her, and she wants to know what. So the only way in science to figure out what has gone wrong is to duplicate the exact circumstances of the thing. So she does that. And in the show, they mention, in the second episode, the narrator mentions that it's like a 6-8 month period that she is continually electrocuting herself to figure this out.
And so she's going a bunch of places that you don't necessarily explore in the show.
Exactly. And I time jumped the show because I wanted to get into more meat of the things. I wanted to stop the discovery part and say, okay, we know how this works now. Now it's adventure time, right? So I skipped all the discovery part. But in the book, I was able to explore some of that discovery. And then the same thing there's multiple places in the show where there were time gaps. But then in the book, I get to explore those. And then as it pulls together, so the trajectory will be the same. I did. Time travel's hard. I don't know if you've ever.
Yeah, I've never written a time travel story. At least not a full novel anyway, and let alone a series of novels and an audio drama.
So paradox is a thing in time travel. And there's all sorts of different paradoxes. The grandfather paradox. If you go back in time and you kill the man who is your grandfather, will you exist? That sort of thing. And I couldn't find a way. Because when I opened this, I wasn't ready to finish it. I had no idea where I was going. And so I didn't have an endpoint. So as I realized that I was going to have to come to an endpoint at some point, I started investigating all the different time travel books that have ever been written, and there's like a bazillion articles, and there's even like actual books that are just written about the paradoxes inherent in time travel. And what I ended up coming to believe is that it's not possible to write time travel without paradox, because our concept of time is so immutable, and time travel makes that immutable concept mutable. And so that's a paradox in and of itself, and it's where we are. So I chose to go with the Ouroboros paradox, which is that the end is the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I bring it all full circle back to that first laboratory and the
no need to spoil everything, though.
And, I'm not going to say what I do in the laboratory, but I bring it full circle back around to that point in time.
Okay.
And that allowed me to end the story without, having to... Because I think...
it doesn't tie it all up necessarily in the same way.
It does not. And it does give you a great number of questions, but I hope they're good questions.
Yes.
Afterwards. But so the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, is the sort of thing that I chose.
Classic. Alchemist's sign too, right? I think, yeah, and also there was that novel, the pre-Tolkien fantasy novel, The Worm Ouroboros as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that is, that's a concept that's been in our culture for a very long time, and it was a nice one that we could use to be the mechanic for our story. So the interesting thing when it came to writing that, I came to that decision about the end of season 2. So I had 2 more years worth of episodes to think about, how am I weaving in these bits so that when I get to that end, everybody goes, I should have seen that coming, but they didn't see it coming,
Yeah, and that's how discovering a story. I mean, I also discover my own work, and I I think what you're describing makes perfect sense to me now. I can't imagine doing it with time travel, because time travel is kind of oh boy, that's a whole other can of worms for me. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I really like the feeling that I get when I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to, when I'm working through the story and I'm about maybe a third or halfway through just a one novel deal, because most I've written single novels, and I'm like, oh, this is how it's starting to come back together. I opened up a bunch of stuff to start with, and it starts coming back together in the middle, or wherever it happens. Then I'm like, oh, now I'm starting to pay stuff off. Perfect. And it's weird how it seems to work. Just it works out, even though, granted, it didn't always do that for me, because I wrote 25 novels before it really did that for me. But now it does that pretty much every time, which is pretty nice.
That's fantastic, and that's a lot of practice there, Tim.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's been a few years since that started happening, but and now I've got I don't have a ton of novels out, mind you. Most of those novels where it didn't happen, and it's not that they're not that good, so they didn't get published. But there you go.
Well, yeah, and the fact of the matter is, I think this is something that we're not very nice to ourselves as writers. We have a tendency to, when we first start writing, comparing what we're doing to established writers that are at the top of their craft, and we think, oh, what I write isn't good because of this. See these people and they're good. And we don't see anybody's, behind the scenes work. And the other problem we have as writers is that we have school. And school, we could have been taught any number of really bad ways to write.
I know I was.
And bad ways to approach a thing. Because school, even if you're taking a creative writing class, school is not about teaching you to write well or teaching you to write from your heart. School's about teaching you to write for the grade. Yeah.
100%.
And that just doesn't work when you're doing your own grading, So
that's true. You're looking for somebody else to validate you, which is always part of the problem. Because as a writer, ever since I started getting reviews and stuff, I'm like, well, sometimes I get validated and sometimes I don't, and it's not really dependent on how good the book is. Because I think all my books are good, the ones I published anyway. And it's like, oh, so I guess people didn't like this one as much, or people thought that part didn't work, or whatever, but a lot of the time I have to look back at those same parts and say, well, no, that part did work, and that part wasn't as good as I thought it was. I didn't enjoy writing that as much. I didn't enjoy reading that as much. But it doesn't matter to them, and I don't really shouldn't. But I've got to find my validation from myself, is my point. And I think that's true for all writers on some level.
Yeah, I think so, really. And the interesting thing is that since sticking to my guns in a weird sort of way and writing the weirdness that is Sage and Savant, rather than switching to something that was pure mainstream genre, now those other books are getting attention. Mm-hmm. Because I do have an audience and I do have a track record. And now they're going,
we could use more weird stuff like Eddie Louise writes.
And the thing is, you think about any of the writers that kind of plow their own path. They are nothing until they're suddenly something.
Yeah.
And Gaiman's a great example of that. He toiled in the obscurity trenches for a very long time.
Absolutely.
And he was doing all his weird little things that he was doing and getting next to no attention from major publishing. But once he got one thing that came out and was popular, then suddenly, but he's himself.
He didn't change. He didn't really change.
Writes,
yeah.
And he doesn't write to any one genre either, but he's celebrated for that fact. So for those of us that aren't, one genre writers, I think we just have to take heart and say, keep writing, keep developing your craft, keep trying to write stronger and stronger stories, because when and if you take off, you're going to have a brand that no one else can touch. No one else is ever going to be able to write what Eddie Louise writes because it's just singular.
Yeah, I would not have. I would never have thought of that sage and savant concept at all, ever. I mean, and I don't think you would have thought of some of the concepts I've come up with. I mean, everybody's got their own stuff, especially when you're one of the odd ones out, like I suppose both of us are in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but and when it comes to discovery writing, I started years ago. I was a reading specialist, and I was teaching kids to read, and then as I got more and more, I was being pulled to private schools a lot to be like a intense focus teacher of kids that really needed help. And then they went, "You're really good at this. Can you do some writing stuff?" And so I started teaching writing to kids too. And so I developed this thing. I tweeted it the other day for someone, and you liked it. But for my kids, I teach it as your story's alive when you think of 5. And this is the only things I have to think of before I begin writing. Who is my character, and where are they? And so how do they live? And what is everyday normal for them before the story begins? The second, what do they want that isn't part of their everyday normal? The third, what is the opposing force, either the person or the thing or the system or the culture that will stop them from getting that thing they want? How does that opposing force and the character come together? Although I also put, the end is, does the character get their desires, and how have they changed because they did or did not get their desires? I don't have to know that at the beginning.
Right.
I have to have some vague idea of where the end is. And so using Petronella Sage, what she wanted more than anything else was to be given the same acknowledgement and praise that male scientists got. She wanted to play with the big boys, and she wanted to be acknowledged for it. But I kind of knew that I couldn't give that to her because she was a scientist in 1895. And just the same way that a female soccer player right now could want to play with the men in the major leagues, she could desire that all she wants. But the system is set that she's not going to get that, right? So the best that she could get is being the trailblazer for the women who come after her. And so I kind of knew for Petronella Sage that it was gonna have to come back to
so
that.
So a bit of a bittersweet kind of ending, yeah.
A bit of a bittersweet kind of ending. But knowing that, I allowed her desires to change over the course and mature over the course of the story. So in a funny way, she still gets what she wants. And that's how I looked at it. But if you have those 5 things in mind, and like I said, most times I don't even know the end. I just know where is the crisis point.
Yeah, like, what's the pass-fail kind of thing, yeah.
Yes, yeah, so in this, the crisis point is the male establishment is not going to allow her to have the same respect and get everything that they got. And so I know that that's the crisis when Petronella came up against that, and she can't make it budge. And so knowing that, then I can just free write until I get to the answer. And that system seems to work really, really well for me. If I outline something and I outline it like scene by scene, it's a guarantee I won't write it.
Yes, that's how it's been for me for a long time. Yeah,
I know the story. Why would I want to write it now? Why would I? Going back over old ground.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing I've noticed with because I have tried outlining a bunch of times, and sometimes generally the way I get I get to write a story that I've outlined is I knock the outline down bit by bit until it's basically until it's boiled down to just the very bare bones, and then even then I'll knock out a wall here and there and just keep going.
Yeah.
It's fun though. It's actually kind of a fun process, even though I don't generally do it anymore.
I had one novel that I wrote that I had outlined, and the whole motivation for the main character was that he had a deadbeat dad. And I wrote the whole book with him having a deadbeat dad. And then literally at the crisis point in that book, it was revealed that his dad had walked the exact hero's path that he's been walking and had disappeared in that effort. And that he wasn't a deadbeat dad. He didn't desert mom and family. He failed at the very same thing that my hero was trying to do. And when that came to me, I was literally brushing my teeth at night, full mouth of foam, and it suddenly hit me that his father was still alive, but because he was in failure state, this is one that has parallel dimensions. And his father, failure state, sent him to a parallel dimension, but he's still alive. And when I realized that, I come running out of the bathroom. I'm like, oh my God! I'm foaming at mouth. My husband
literally
thinks I'm
foaming.
rabid.
Yeah.
My husband thinks I'm rabid. But the funny thing was, when I went back to make that change in the book, I had one line I had to change, which was when the lead character's mother called the dad a deadbeat. And it turned out that she had known all along and had been trying to keep her son from making the same mistakes as his father. And so she hadn't told him the truth. And when I removed that line about the deadbeat dad, so that it wasn't that she was, being distasteful towards the husband who disappeared, everything else fit. The entire other novel was already there. My subconscious had known it.
No, that is always so cool. That feeling, that magic is some of the best. I mean, I'm suddenly there's a whole vista opens up in front of you and you just couldn't see it before because you're too busy hacking your way through the brush. But
exactly.
Yeah. No, but Eddie, we've got just a few minutes left here. So tell people what have you been reading lately? Just pick one thing because we were really low on time.
Okay, one thing. Catherine Valente's new novella, The Past is Red. It is amazing. The lead character's name is Tetley. She lives on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And this is a post-flood, post-climate change. The world has ended, and the surviving human community is literally perching on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and you get your name by the first thing people call you when you wander into a different side of the garbage patch. And they call you things based on what bits of garbage are sticking to you. So Tetley Teabag sticking to Tetley, and that's how she got her name. And it is both the most bleak climate change novel and the most hopeful, heart-rendingly hopeful that I've ever read. And it will stick with me for years. So Catherine Valente, she wrote The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Boat of Her Own Making. Yeah. She wrote Deathless. But The Past is Red is just genius, and everyone should read it.
Awesome. So I've got a book. I'm actually the book I'm thinking about isn't new. It's actually I just recently started the Gormenghast series by Mervyn Peake.
Oh yes.
Because I've been reading, and I actually am still reading some Elric of Melnibone books by Michael Moorcock. Mm-hmm. And in the third one of those, the third prequel anyway, which is I started them in order of the story, not order of they were written in. But the third one has an epigraph, which is a quote from Mervyn Peake in the middle, right in the middle, in one of the part breaks. I'm like, wait a minute, I remember Gormenghast. I need to go. I haven't read it yet. I need to go do that. So I immediately got the ebooks, and I've really been enjoying approaching all the books I've been reading, kind of like more like they're toys than they're stories. And this is a weird. I might have to get into this more on another episode because we don't have a lot of time. But when I'm reading lately, I'm like, I'm just going to embrace what I do, which is bounce around every page and not really read in order and just go, I mean, I read more or less in order, but I just like reading whatever sentence pops, catches my eye first, and then I'll go back and read the rest and gradually fill it all in.
You must read The Past is Red then, because Valente specifically, her language is so delicious, and it is exactly the type of thing that you can bounce from sentence to sentence, from page to page, and just be given these very profound things to go, whoa.
Well, I'll have to check that out for sure, and everyone else should probably check it out too. It sounds great. And Gormenghast is this. Just to go briefly in the summer here, Gormenghast, for those who don't know, is a classic. Semi-fantasy story about basically. It's all set in basically one big castle called Gormenghast, and I don't know a whole ton about it yet because I'm still new at this thing, but it's it's a bit of an odd kind of picaresque tale. Anyway, anyway, folks, thanks for listening, and Eddie Louise, thanks for being on the show. It's been great.
It has been great to have this discussion and be here with you. And hey, catch up with me on Twitter. I'm at Eddie Louise there, and I'd love to make connections with you even.
Oh, do you have a website or anything that we should point people toward?
I'm an old, so everything is my name. So eddielouise.com is my website.
Oh, nice.
I'm at Eddie Louise on Twitter and Facebook, but I don't really go to Facebook much anymore.
Probably a wise decision.
I only check in once every couple of weeks there. But Twitter, I'm pretty much always there, and that's the fastest way to get me at any time. And I'm always down to talk time travel, science fiction, fantasy. It's my life, so.
Yes, we are all traveling through time, but especially you.
Very, very much.
So yeah, as for this podcast, thanks. You can listen to more of our episodes at mentalcellarpublications.com, and you can find all my books at timniederreiter.com/books. Thanks for listening, folks. Take it easy. Stay safe out there. And talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Good night.
That tears it.
Good night.